You wake up at 3 a.m., heart racing for no apparent reason. Your mind immediately begins cataloguing everything that could go wrong tomorrow, next week, next year. The presentation you have to give, the relationship that feels uncertain, the career path that seems increasingly unclear. All of it crashes down on you in the darkness of your bedroom. You try to rationalize it away, telling yourself there's nothing to worry about, but your body doesn't seem to get the message. Welcome to the modern experience of anxiety, a psychological phenomenon that has become as common as checking your phone. But what exactly is happening to you in these moments? Why does your mind seem determined to torture you with scenarios that may never come to pass? And perhaps most importantly, what does this tell us about the nature of human consciousness itself? The ancient brain in a modern world. Your anxiety isn't a character flaw or a sign of weakness. It's actually your brain doing exactly what it evolved to do. For thousands of years, your ancestors survived because their brains were finely tuned threat detection machines. That rustling in the bushes could be wind, or it could be a predator. Those who assumed the worst and ran lived to pass on their genes. Those who shrugged it off sometimes didn't. You've inherited this same neural architecture, but now you're trying to use it to navigate a world your ancestors could never have imagined. Your amygdala, that almond-shaped region deep in your brain responsible for processing fear and threat, doesn't distinguish between a charging lion and a passive-aggressive text from your boss. It floods your system with the same stress hormones, prepares your body for the same fight-or-flight response, and leaves you feeling like you need to run even when you're just sitting at your desk. This creates what philosophers might call an existential mismatch. Your being, your conscious thinking self, is trapped in a body designed for a different kind of existence. You're experiencing what happens when an ancient operating system tries to run modern software. The result? Bugs. Lots of them. The paradox of anticipatory suffering. Here's where things get philosophically interesting. Most of your anxiety isn't about what's happening to you right now. It's about what might happen later. You're literally suffering over events that exist only in your imagination. The Buddha pointed this out over 2,500 years ago, but modern psychology has given us the neurological details of how this works. When you worry, your brain activates the same regions involved in actually experiencing trauma. Your prefrontal cortex, the part responsible for planning and reasoning, goes into overdrive, generating scenario after scenario of potential doom. Meanwhile, your limbic system responds as if these imagined threats are real and present. You're essentially time-traveling into hypothetical futures and bringing back emotional baggage. Think about the last time you were anxious about a social event. You probably ran through dozens of conversations that might happen. Imagine awkward silences, worried about what people would think of your outfit, your jokes, your very existence. You experienced genuine distress over interactions that were entirely fictional. Then, when the event actually happened, it probably went nothing like you imagined, and you realized you'd suffered twice, once in anticipation and once, if at all, in reality. This raises profound questions about the nature of time and consciousness. If you can suffer over future events that may never occur, what does that say about the relationship between your mind and reality? Are you living in the present moment, or are you a refugee from your own imagination? The illusion of control. Much of your anxiety stems from a fundamental cognitive illusion, the belief that worrying gives you some measure of control over future outcomes. Your brain has convinced itself that by mentally rehearsing disasters, you're somehow preventing them or preparing for them. This is what psychologists call worry as coping, the idea that anxiety serves a functional purpose. But here's the uncomfortable truth. Most of what you worry about is completely outside your control. You can't control whether other people like you, whether the economy crashes, whether your relationship will last forever, or whether you'll get sick. You can influence some of these things, but you can't control them. And yet your mind keeps trying, like someone frantically pressing a button that isn't connected to anything. This connects to ancient philosophical debates about free will and determinism. How much agency do you actually have in your life? If so much is outside your control, why does your brain exhaust itself trying to manage the unmanageable? Perhaps anxiety is the price we pay for consciousness itself, for being aware enough to contemplate futures we cannot fully shape. The social construction of your worries, your specific anxieties aren't random. They're deeply shaped by the culture and time period you live in. A medieval peasant didn't lie awake worrying about their LinkedIn profile or whether they were saving enough for retirement. Your grandmother probably didn't experience FOMO, fear of missing out, the way you do, because she wasn't constantly exposed to curated highlight reels of other people's lives. Consider how social media has transformed the landscape of your anxiety. You're now aware of more opportunities, more threats, more comparisons than any human in history. You know what your high school classmates are doing, what strangers across the world are achieving, what you should be experiencing at your age according to countless online articles and posts. Your brain, designed to track the social dynamics of a small tribe, is now trying to process information about millions of people simultaneously. This creates what sociologists call compare and despair, a constant sense that everyone else is doing better than you are. But you're comparing your inner experience, complete with all your doubts, fears, and mundane moments, to other people's external presentations, carefully curated and filtered. It's like comparing the rough draft of your life to everyone else's published version. The philosophical question this raises is profound. Who are you when stripped of social comparison? Is your identity inherently relational, defined by how you stack up against others, or do you have some essential self that exists independent of social context? Your anxiety might be telling you something important about the social construction of the self. The perfectionism trap. Much of your anxiety probably stems from perfectionism, not the healthy desire to do well, but the pathological fear of doing anything less than perfectly. You set impossibly high standards for yourself, then live in constant fear of falling short. You procrastinate on important tasks because you're afraid your effort won't be good enough. You replay conversations, analysing every word for signs that you said something wrong. Perfectionism is really a form of existential insurance policy. If you can just be perfect enough, you tell yourself you'll be safe from criticism, rejection, and failure. But perfectionism is impossible by definition, which means you're trapped in a system designed to generate anxiety. You're essentially trying to solve the problem of being human by being something other than human. This connects to philosophical questions about authenticity and self-acceptance. What would it mean to accept yourself as fundamentally flawed and still worthy of love and respect? How much of your identity is built on achievement versus simply being? Your perfectionist anxiety might be your psyche's way of avoiding deeper questions about your inherent worth. The anxiety of infinite choice. Previous generations often had their life paths largely determined for them by family, class, geography, gender, or tradition. While this limited freedom, it also provided structure and certainty. You, on the other hand, live in an age of unprecedented choice. You can live almost anywhere, pursue almost any career, create almost any kind of lifestyle, identify in almost any way. This freedom is both liberating and terrifying. Psychologist Barry Schwartz calls this the paradox of choice. Too many options can lead to decision paralysis and anxiety. When everything is possible, how do you know if you're making the right choices? When any path could lead to success or failure, how do you choose? The weight of infinite possibility can be crushing. You might find yourself anxious about closing off options, even ones you don't really want. You worry about settling down because what if someone better comes along? You worry about choosing a career because what if you discover your true passion later? You worry about commitment because what if you're missing out on other experiences? This raises profound questions about the nature of freedom and happiness. Does having unlimited choices actually make you freer? Or does it create a new kind of prison? Is anxiety the price we pay for living in an open society? Perhaps your decision-making anxiety reflects a deeper philosophical problem. How do you choose a meaningful life when meaning itself is a choice? The loneliness epidemic and existential anxiety. Despite being more connected than ever through technology, you probably sometimes feel profoundly alone. This isn't just social loneliness, it's existential loneliness, the sense that your inner experience is fundamentally isolated and unknowable to others. You worry that if people really knew you, they wouldn't like you. You feel like you're performing a version of yourself rather than simply being yourself. This existential isolation fuels many of your anxieties. You worry about being judged because you feel like you're the only one struggling with doubt and insecurity. You assume everyone else has figured out something you haven't. You feel pressure to appear confident and successful, while internally feeling lost and overwhelmed. But here's what's both comforting and unsettling. Everyone feels this way sometimes. Your anxiety about being uniquely flawed is itself almost universal. The very thing that makes you feel most alone, your inner uncertainty and fear, is actually one of the most human things about you. This is what philosophers call the human condition, the simultaneous desire for connection and the impossibility of truly merging with another consciousness. The meaning-making machine. Your brain is constantly trying to make sense of your experience, to find patterns and explanations for what happens to you. When something bad occurs, you immediately start asking why, and what does this mean? This meaning-making drive is one of humanity's greatest strengths. It's how you learn, adapt, and create culture. But it can also fuel anxiety. Sometimes things happen for no particular reason. Sometimes life is genuinely chaotic and unpredictable. But your brain can't accept this. It would rather construct a negative explanation than accept no explanation at all. So when someone doesn't text you back immediately, your brain creates a story. They're angry with you. They don't like you. You said something wrong. When you feel nervous about a presentation, your brain tells you it's because you're unprepared, incompetent, or bound to fail. These anxious narratives feel true because your brain constructed them, but they're often just stories you're telling yourself to avoid the discomfort of uncertainty. The philosophical question is, how much of your reality is actually constructed by your own mind? If your anxious thoughts aren't necessarily true, what else might you be wrong about? The courage to be anxious. Here's perhaps the most important insight about your anxiety. It's often a sign that you're doing something meaningful. You feel anxious about relationships because connection matters to you. You feel anxious about your career because you want to contribute something valuable. You feel anxious about the future because you care about what happens. Anxiety and meaning are often intimately connected. The things that make you most anxious are frequently the things that matter most to you. Your worry about being a good friend reveals your commitment to friendship. Your concern about your work performance reflects your desire to be competent and helpful. Your fear of failure demonstrates your commitment to success. This doesn't mean you should embrace anxiety or seek it out, but it does suggest that completely eliminating anxiety might not be possible or even desirable. Some level of anxiety is the price of caring, of being invested in outcomes you can't fully control. The goal isn't to become someone who never worries, it's to develop a healthier relationship with your worry. The practice of presence. So what can you do with all this understanding? How do you live with an ancient brain in a modern world, with infinite choices and existential isolation, with the constant buzz of anxiety in the background of your consciousness? The answer isn't to eliminate anxiety entirely. That's neither possible nor advisable. Instead, it's to develop what might be called anxiety wisdom. The ability to recognize anxious thoughts as mental events rather than facts, to understand their evolutionary and social origins, and to respond to them with compassion rather than resistance. When you notice yourself spiraling into worry, you can pause and ask, is this anxiety telling me something useful? Or is it just my brain doing what brains do? Am I solving a real problem, or am I rehearsing imaginary disasters? What would I do right now if I weren't afraid? This isn't about positive thinking or pretending everything's fine. It's about recognizing that your anxious thoughts are part of your experience, but not the totality of it. You're larger than your anxiety, more complex than your fears, more resilient than your worries suggest. The paradox of acceptance. One of the most counterintuitive discoveries in psychology is that trying to get rid of anxiety often makes it worse. When you resist anxious thoughts, when you judge yourself for having them, when you fight against the physical sensations of fear, you often intensify the very experience you're trying to escape. It's like quicksand. The more you struggle, the deeper you sink. But when you learn to accept anxiety as a natural part of human experience, something interesting happens. The anxiety doesn't necessarily disappear, but it loses some of its power over you. You stop being anxious about being anxious. You recognize worry as weather passing through your mind rather than a permanent state of being. This acceptance isn't resignation or passivity. It's a form of courage. It takes tremendous bravery to feel afraid and continue moving forward anyway. It requires strength to acknowledge uncertainty without demanding immediate answers. It's an act of rebellion against your brain's demand for control and certainty. Living the questions. The poet Rainer Maria Rilke once wrote, "Live the questions now. Perhaps you will then gradually, without noticing it, live along some distant day into the answer." This might be the most practical advice for dealing with anxiety, learning to live comfortably with questions rather than demanding immediate answers. Your anxiety often stems from questions you can't answer. Will this work out? Am I making the right choice? What if something goes wrong? What will people think? These are fundamentally unanswerable questions about an uncertain future, and your attempts to resolve them through worry are futile. But what if you could live with not knowing? What if uncertainty became not a problem to solve but a condition to accept? What if the discomfort of not having all the answers was simply part of being human, as natural as breathing or aging? The wisdom of your worry. Your anxiety, for all its discomfort, contains wisdom. It tells you what you care about, alerts you to potential problems, and motivates you to prepare and protect what matters to you. It's an ancient system trying its best to keep you safe in a world it doesn't quite understand. The goal isn't to silence this system, but to work with it more skillfully. You can acknowledge your brain's concerns without being ruled by them. You can feel fear without letting it make all your decisions. You can experience uncertainty without demanding certainty. In the end, your anxiety is part of the price of being conscious, of caring, of being fully human. It's uncomfortable, but it's also profoundly meaningful. It connects you to the long history of humans who have worried about their children, their tribes, their futures. It reminds you that you are a creature capable of imagining tomorrow and caring about what it might bring. Your anxiety isn't a flaw in your programming. It's evidence that your programming is working exactly as designed. The challenge isn't to become someone who never worries, but to become someone who can worry wisely, who can feel afraid and choose courage anyway, who can live with uncertainty and still find meaning in the midst of the unknown. In learning to understand and work with your anxiety, you're not just managing a psychological symptom, you're engaging with some of the deepest questions of human existence. What does it mean to be conscious? How do you live with uncertainty? What is the relationship between fear and love, between worry and care, between anxiety and meaning? These aren't questions with final answers, but they're questions worth living. And in living them, you might discover that your anxiety, that persistent, uncomfortable, deeply human companion, has been teaching you something important about what it means to be alive. The neuroscience of overthinking. Your anxious mind isn't just philosophically complex, it's neurologically fascinating. When you're caught in a cycle of worry, specific neural networks in your brain light up like a Christmas tree. The default mode network, which includes regions like the medial prefrontal cortex and posterior cingulate cortex, becomes hyperactive. This is the same network that's active when you're daydreaming, remembering the past, or imagining the future. But here's where it gets interesting. This network doesn't distinguish between productive planning and destructive rumination. When you're lying in bed at 2 a.m. mentally rehearsing tomorrow's difficult conversation for the 15th time, your brain is using the same circuits it would use for genuinely helpful preparation. The difference isn't neurological, it's contextual and temporal. You've probably noticed that your most intense anxiety often strikes when you're not actively engaged in something demanding. It's in the shower, during your commute, in those quiet moments before sleep when your mind has nothing else to focus on. This isn't coincidence. It's your default mode network filling the cognitive vacuum with whatever feels most pressing, which is usually whatever you're most worried about. This creates what researchers call cognitive load theory in action. Your brain has limited processing capacity, and when that capacity isn't being used for immediate tasks, it defaults to scanning for threats and problems. It's like having a security guard who gets increasingly paranoid during quiet shifts, seeing danger in every shadow because there's nothing else to focus on. Understanding this can be liberating. Your tendency to overthink isn't a character flaw. It's a predictable feature of how your brain operates when it's not otherwise occupied. This is why anxiety often strikes hardest during transitions, quiet moments, and times of low stimulation. Your brain isn't broken. It's just doing what brains do when they're not busy with immediate demands. The body keeps the score. Your anxiety isn't just happening in your head. It's a full-body experience that involves systems you're not even consciously aware of. Your vagus nerve, which connects your brain to your heart, lungs, and digestive system, carries anxiety signals throughout your body faster than you can think them. This is why you might feel butterflies in your stomach before you consciously realize you're nervous about something. Your autonomic nervous system, the part that controls breathing, heart rate, and digestion, doesn't wait for your rational mind to assess whether a threat is real. It responds to the mere possibility of danger by shifting into sympathetic dominance. Your heart rate increases, your breathing becomes shallow, your muscles tense, and your digestion slows down. You're being prepared for physical action even when the threat exists only in your imagination. This creates a feedback loop that can intensify anxiety. You think an anxious thought, your body responds with physical symptoms. You notice those symptoms and interpret them as evidence that something really is wrong, which generates more anxious thoughts, which creates more physical symptoms. You're essentially arguing with your own nervous system, and your nervous system is winning. But your body also holds the key to breaking this cycle. Your breath is the one aspect of your autonomic nervous system that you can consciously control and it's directly connected to your emotional state. When you slow down your exhale to be longer than your inhale, you're literally activating your parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest response that counteracts anxiety. This isn't just relaxation technique folklore, it's neurophysiology. Your vagus nerve has sensors that detect the length of your exhales and sends signals to your brain about whether you're safe or in danger. Long, slow exhales literally tell your brain that you're not being chased by a predator, even if your thoughts suggest otherwise. The evolutionary mismatch. To truly understand your anxiety, you need to appreciate the profound mismatch between your Stone Age brain and your Space Age problems. Your neural architecture was shaped by millions of years of evolution in small hunter-gatherer groups where most threats were immediate, physical and solvable through action. When your ancestor encountered a dangerous animal, the threat was real, present, and could be addressed by fighting or fleeing. The anxiety response was adaptive because it mobilized energy for immediate action. The problem was solved within minutes or hours, and then the nervous system could return to baseline. Now consider your modern anxieties: climate change, economic uncertainty, social media comparison, career prospects, relationship dynamics, global politics. These are abstract, long-term, complex problems that can't be solved by running or fighting. They're also continuous rather than episodic. They don't have clear beginnings and endings like ancestral threats did. Your brain keeps trying to apply its ancient problem-solving template to these modern concerns. It floods you with stress hormones as if you could somehow punch climate change or run away from economic inequality. It keeps you in a state of hypervigilance, as if constant worry could somehow solve problems that require collective action, policy changes, or simply time. This evolutionary mismatch explains why anxiety can feel so overwhelming and unproductive. You're experiencing Stone Age solutions to Space Age problems, and the mismatch creates a kind of psychological friction that burns through your mental energy without generating useful outcomes. The social construction of mental health. Your relationship with your own anxiety is deeply influenced by cultural messages about what constitutes normal mental health. You live in a society that increasingly pathologizes emotional discomfort, while simultaneously creating conditions that make emotional discomfort almost inevitable. On one hand, you're told that anxiety is a medical condition that requires treatment, that feeling worried or uncertain is a symptom rather than a natural response to uncertain conditions. On the other hand, you're surrounded by uncertainty, competition, isolation, and information overload that would make anyone feel anxious. This creates what might be called meta-anxiety. Anxiety about having anxiety. You worry that your worry means something is wrong with you, that you should be handling things better, that other people don't struggle the way you do. You medicalize normal human responses to abnormal conditions. But what if your anxiety is actually a rational response to irrational circumstances? What if feeling overwhelmed by overwhelming conditions is a sign of sanity rather than pathology? What if your nervous system is accurately detecting that something isn't quite right about the pace, pressure, and priorities of modern life? This doesn't mean all anxiety is healthy or that you should simply accept suffering. It means that some of your anxiety might be your psyche's way of saying that your life circumstances need adjustment, not just your brain chemistry. Sometimes the problem isn't your response to your environment, it's your environment itself. The paradox of self-improvement. You probably have a complicated relationship with self-help culture and the endless array of anxiety management techniques available to you. On one hand, you want tools that work, strategies that provide relief, methods that give you some sense of control over your inner experience. On the other hand, the very pursuit of anxiety elimination can become another source of anxiety. when meditation doesn't immediately calm your mind, when therapy doesn't provide quick fixes, when lifestyle changes don't eliminate worry, you might start worrying about your worry management. You're not just anxious about your original concerns, you're anxious about your inability to not be anxious about them. This creates what psychologists call the second arrow of suffering. The first arrow is your original anxiety about work, relationships, or the future. The second arrow is your anxiety about having anxiety, your frustration with your own mind, your sense that you should be better at managing your emotions by now. The self-improvement paradox is that the harder you try to eliminate anxiety, the more central anxiety becomes to your identity and daily experience. You're essentially fighting a war against part of yourself, and wars create casualties even when you win battles. Perhaps the real skill isn't learning to eliminate anxiety, but learning to have a different relationship with it. Instead of seeing anxiety as an enemy to defeat, what if you could see it as information to consider, energy to channel, or simply one weather pattern in the larger climate of your consciousness? The creativity of worry. Here's something fascinating about your anxious mind. It's incredibly creative. When you worry, you're essentially writing elaborate fiction about future scenarios, complete with dialogue, plot twists, and vivid sensory details. You're a novelist of disaster, a screenwriter of worst-case scenarios, an artist whose medium is imagined catastrophe. This creative capacity isn't separate from your anxiety, it's central to it. Your ability to envision multiple futures, to imagine complex social dynamics, to anticipate problems that don't yet exist. These are sophisticated cognitive skills that humans have developed to an extraordinary degree. The same mental faculties that generate your most creative insights also generate your most persistent worries. The brain that can write poetry, solve complex problems, and envision better worlds is the same brain that can construct elaborate scenarios of personal failure and social rejection. This suggests something profound about the relationship between creativity and anxiety. Many artists, writers, innovators, and thinkers throughout history have struggled with anxiety, and it's possible that anxiety and creativity share common neural pathways. The ability to see what isn't there yet, whether that's a solution to a problem or a potential disaster, might be two sides of the same cognitive coin. Understanding this connection can change how you relate to your anxious thoughts. Instead of seeing them as purely negative mental events, you might recognize them as evidence of your brain's remarkable capacity for imagination and scenario planning. The goal isn't to shut down this capacity, but to direct it more skillfully. The wisdom of insecurity. Security is largely an illusion, though a compelling one. You seek stable relationships, reliable income, predictable outcomes, and clear plans, but the fundamental nature of existence is impermanence and uncertainty. Everything you cherish will eventually change or end. Everyone you love will eventually die. All your achievements will eventually be forgotten. This isn't meant to be depressing. It's meant to be liberating. If insecurity is the natural state of existence, then your anxiety about insecurity makes perfect sense. You're not failing at life because you feel uncertain. You're accurately perceiving the uncertain nature of life itself. Much of your anxiety stems from trying to create permanent security in an impermanent world. You want guarantees that don't exist, certainties that aren't available, promises that can't be kept. You're essentially trying to solve the problem of being mortal by accumulating enough money, love, status, or control to make yourself invulnerable. But vulnerability isn't a problem to solve, it's a condition to accept. Your openness to being hurt is also your openness to being moved, touched, and changed by life. Your capacity for loss is also your capacity for love. Your awareness of uncertainty is also your awareness of possibility. Learning to find wisdom in insecurity doesn't mean becoming passive or fatalistic. It means recognizing that your attempts to eliminate all risk and uncertainty are not only impossible, but also counterproductive. They prevent you from fully engaging with life because you're always trying to protect yourself from life. The practice of compassionate realism. So how do you actually live with all of this understanding? How do you translate philosophical insights about anxiety into practical ways of being in the world? The answer might lie in what could be called compassionate realism, a way of relating to your anxiety that is both honest about its challenges and kind about its origins. Compassionate realism means acknowledging that your anxiety is often based on legitimate concerns, while also recognizing that worry rarely solves the problems it focuses on. It means understanding that your brain is doing its best to protect you, while also knowing that its protection strategies are often outdated and excessive. This approach involves developing what might be called metacognitive awareness, the ability to observe your own thinking processes without being completely identified with them. When you notice yourself spiraling into worry, you can pause and recognize, my brain is doing that thing where it tries to solve unsolvable problems by thinking about them obsessively. This recognition doesn't immediately stop the worry, but it creates some space around it. You're no longer completely fused with your anxious thoughts. You're able to see them as mental events that arise and pass away, rather than as absolute truths about your situation. Compassionate realism also involves treating yourself with the same kindness you would offer a good friend who was struggling with worry. You wouldn't tell a friend that their anxiety is stupid, or that they should just stop worrying. You would probably acknowledge their concerns while also helping them gain perspective on them. The integration of anxiety. The ultimate goal isn't to eliminate anxiety from your life, it's to integrate it more skillfully into your overall experience of being human. This means learning to live with uncertainty without being paralyzed by it, to feel fear without being controlled by it, to acknowledge problems without being consumed by them. Integration means recognizing anxiety as one instrument in the orchestra of your consciousness, rather than letting it drown out all the other instruments. Your anxiety has valuable information to offer about what you care about, what seems risky, what deserves attention. But it's not the only source of information available to you. You also have access to wisdom, compassion, creativity, humor, love, and countless other ways of relating to your experience. Anxiety is part of your psychological repertoire, but it doesn't have to be the dominant part. Learning to conduct this inner orchestra, to give anxiety its voice without letting it hijack the entire performance, is perhaps one of the most important skills you can develop. This integration is ongoing rather than final. There's no graduation ceremony where you receive your diploma in anxiety management and never worry again. Instead, there's the daily practice of relating more skillfully to your own mind, of responding rather than reacting to your inner experience, of finding meaning and purpose even in the midst of uncertainty and fear. Your anxiety, in all its discomfort and complexity, is part of what makes you human. It connects you to your evolutionary heritage, to your cultural moment, to your deepest values and concerns. Learning to dance with it rather than fight against it might be one of the most profound forms of self-acceptance available to you. In this dance, you discover that anxiety isn't your enemy. It's your teacher, your protector, your somewhat overzealous companion on the journey of consciousness. And in learning to relate to it with wisdom and compassion, you learn something essential about what it means to be fully, courageously, and beautifully human.